Old-school filmmakers built Troy, sent stop-motion skeletons into battle, and made the ancient world feel enormous without enormous budgets. Here are 7 such productions, including one nearly forgotten television series that may still be the most complete screen adaptation of the Odyssey ever made. In 1954, before the sword-and-sandal boom, and before either Christopher Nolan or Matt Damon was even born, Ulysses arrived in cinemas. Odysseus goes by his Roman name here and is played by Kirk Douglas in a beard. It was an Italian-American co-production, produced by Dino De Laurentiis and Carlo Ponti, with Paramount quietly involved behind the scenes. The early 1950s were a strange golden window for this kind of arrangement. Production costs in Italy were low, tax incentives were generous, and the Italian film industry itself was still rebuilding after the war. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer's Quo Vadis had already shown that a Hollywood-scale epic could be built on Roman soil. Douglas and Anthony Quinn, who plays Antinous, recorded their own dialogue for the English version. The devastatingly beautiful Silvana Mangano, De Laurentiis' wife, and already a star after Bitter Rice, played both Penelope and Circe. The cinematography was handled by Harold Rawson, freshly imported from Singin' in the Rain, possibly because Hollywood did not yet trust Italian camera crews, or possibly because Paramount simply wanted an American at the helm to keep the Roman schedule from sliding. Special effects fell to Eugen Shuftan, who would later shoot Eyes Without a Face. In Circe's glowing grotto, the lighting is so different from the rest of the film that the sequence is often attributed to Mario Bava, working uncredited on the production. It has never been officially confirmed, but it certainly looks like Bava. The story trims Homer down to 3 encounters, carried in flashback: the Cyclops, whom Ulysses gets drunk before blinding; the Sirens, who call to him in the voices of Penelope and Telemachus while he is tied to the mast; and Circe, who turns the crew into pigs and nearly keeps their captain for good. All of it surfaces when an amnesiac Ulysses washes ashore in Phaeacia and almost marries a local princess, Nausicaa, played by Rossana Podesta, soon to become Helen of Troy herself. Back in Ithaca, Penelope stalls her suitors with an unfinished tapestry until Ulysses returns and settles things personally in a courtyard massacre that must have startled 1954 audiences. Not everything lands. Mangano's solemn expression works beautifully for Circe, but it leaves Penelope looking mildly inconvenienced rather than heartbroken. The film also faces the problem of every feature-length Odyssey adaptation. 10 years of wandering compressed into 3 episodes will always feel more like a highlight reel than an Odyssey. Even so, it still carries all the pleasure of Golden Age spectacle. At least nobody could accuse the armor of looking borrowed from a superhero movie, and it managed all of it without $250 million. 2 years after Ulysses, Warner Brothers tried the same formula with Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships. Rossana Podesta, as I mentioned before, went straight from Ulysses to the title role, an unusual gamble for a major Hollywood release with little conventional star power around her. Robert Wise directed, Max Steiner supplied the score, and stuntman Yakima Kanat handled the battle sequences. Jack Cernas played Paris, Stanley Baker played Achilles, and in a blink-and-miss-it part as Helen's handmaiden was a young Brigitte Bardot, months before Roger Vadim made her a household name. Wise tells the war largely from the Trojan side. Paris sails to Greece seeking peace, is swept overboard in a storm, and is rescued by Helen, who initially pretends to be a slave girl. They fall in love almost immediately, which is unfortunate for diplomacy and even worse for Troy. The romance is hardly Homer, but Hollywood was already fighting the TV set, and this Trojan horse alone was reason enough to leave the house. Hercules was an Italian production with an Italian crew and a former American bodybuilder in the lead, sold to the world by U.S. promoter Joseph E. Levine. His enormous publicity campaign turned the film into an international hit in 1959. Behind the camera, doing double duty as cinematographer and special effects man, was Mario Bava, this time officially credited. The plot barely bothers with the 12 labors. Hercules rescues a princess, gets tangled in a succession dispute, and joins a young Jason on an expedition for the Golden Fleece, essentially absorbing someone else's myth into his own picture. The Nemean lion and Cretan bull appear as ordinary animals to wrestle. A dragon guards the fleece. A sibyl mutters a prophecy. None of it stays close to any single myth, and none of it needs to. What Hercules actually sold was Steve Reeves's physique. It took the scale and pageantry of Hollywood's biblical epics, reduced them to comic book pulp, and played everything with a straight face. It worked so well that Italy spent the next decade producing variations on it. Dozens of Hercules films, followed by Samson, Machista, Goliath, and Atlas. The whole cycle became known as peplum, a name derived from an ancient tunic, or as we've already called it, the sword and sandal genre. 5 years later came Jason and the Argonauts. Peleus steals the throne of Thessaly and sends its rightful heir after the Golden Fleece, hoping the voyage will kill him. Jason gathers the Argonauts, including Hercules, and sails into a world of harpies, a bronze giant, a hydra, and an army of living skeletons. The actors are almost beside the point. The real star is Ray Harryhausen, whose stop-motion creatures give the film its personality. The final skeleton battle alone took months to animate. 3 decades later, Army of Darkness recreated the idea, but the original hardly needed improving. Harryhausen himself regarded Jason and the Argonauts as his finest work. The film also received a more prestigious release than his earlier productions. Columbia booked it as a standalone attraction in many A theaters, rather than placing it in the B-movie double features where his work had usually appeared. Dino De Laurentiis had already compressed Homer into Ulysses in 1954 and apparently never forgave the compromises. 14 years later, he returned with L'Odissea, a nearly 7.5-hour television epic led by director Franco Rossi. This time, there was room for almost the whole journey. Bekim Femiu played Odysseus, aging convincingly across the flashbacks from arrogant young warrior to a man racked with doubt, even as he takes his revenge on Penelope's suitors. Irene Papas played Penelope. The gods are mostly reduced to voices over statues, but the human world feels unusually solid, filmed along the empty, sun-baked coasts of Yugoslavia. Everywhere else, the production insists on details modern epics skip, right down to Odysseus eating with his fingers, as ancient Greek diners commonly did. The highlight is the Cyclops episode, directed by Mario Bava. The encounter with Scylla and Charybdis is avoided rather than staged, but most of Homer survives. The complete series is currently available on YouTube with English subtitles, and it is an absolute must-watch for anyone interested in Greek mythology on film. Pier Paolo Pasolini had a long fascination with Greek tragedy. He had already adapted Oedipus Rex, and in 1969, he turned to Euripides for Medea. It is Jason's story stripped of nearly all its fantasy adventure and played as naturalistic pseudo-history. There is no dragon, no field of fire-breathing oxen, and none of the creatures from the voyage. The only overtly mythical figure left is Chiron, Jason's centaur teacher, who drifts through the film as a strange, half-explained presence. In the title role, Pasolini cast Greek-American opera singer Maria Callas in her only film role, and she completely overshadows the actor playing Jason. Medea helps him steal the Golden Fleece and follows him home, only to be abandoned when he chooses to marry the Princess Glossy. Her revenge destroys the new marriage and, eventually, her own family. Visually, it is often stunning. The costumes are extraordinarily rich, the film is dark and meditative, and its take on Greek tragedy is one of the most distinctive in cinema. For the final film, I chose Clash of the Titans. Not because this is meant to be the final word on Greek mythology and cinema, but because I built the list around films I personally enjoy. You can fill in everything I missed in the comments. Loosely based on the myth of Perseus and Andromeda, the story turns the Greek gods into a particularly destructive family. Zeus, played by Laurence Olivier, fathers Perseus after a fling with Princess Danae, then has to save the boy from his own furious punishment of her city. Perseus gets pulled into a separate feud between Zeus and the sea goddess Thetis. He falls in love with the cursed Princess Andromeda and sets out to win her. Saving her later means facing Medusa and, eventually, the Kraken. It was Ray Harryhausen's final film. His creatures remain the main attraction, even if the mechanical owl Bubo, inevitably compared to R2-D2, has aged into something closer to comic relief. Audiences did not seem to mind. The film grossed nearly 3 times its reported budget.